गुड आफ्टरनून फ्रेंड्स। सहकार सप्ताह के इस वेबिनार में एनयूसीबी की ओर से आप सबका स्वागत है। वी वेलकम ऑल ऑफ यू। जैसे कि आपको पता है कि सहकार सप्ताह 6 जुलाई को समाप्त हो रहा है। 29 जून को ये शुरू हुआ था और इस साल ये सप्ताह ज्यादा इम्पोर्टेंट है क्योंकि मिनिस्ट्री ऑफ कॉर्पोरेशन को 5 साल भी हो गए हैं। और इस सप्ताह के दौरान एनयूसीडीसी ने अर्बन कोऑपरेटिव बैंक्स के लिए सीरीज ऑफ वेबिनार और टॉपिक्स आप लोगों के रखे थे। ये जो है हमारी पाठशाला के एडिशन में ये हमने वेबिनार रखे हैं। आज इसी वेबिनार के हिस्से में हम लोग मिस्टर अमरनाथ सवनाल जी को वेलकम करते हैं। अमरनाथ सर प्रेजेंटली एसवीसी बैंक में डायरेक्टर हैं। ये बहुत एक्टिव पार्टिसिपेंट हैं बोर्ड में। ये पैसे डायरेक्टर नहीं है। ही इज अ मेंबर ऑफ लोन्स कमिटी आल्सो, ऑडिट कमिटी आल्सो, रिस्क कमिटी आल्सो एंड एनपीए कमिटी एंड आईटी कमिटीज आल्सो। सर का करीब 36 साल का एक्सपीरियंस है अक्रॉस द कॉर्पोरेट इन द बैंकिंग स्पेस। सर ने अपना करियर स्टार्ट किया था टाटा ग्रुप से टीसीएस में। ये एक बहुत अर्ली एडॉप्टर हैं आईटी टेक्नोलॉजी के बैंकिंग सेक्टर में। के बाद में सर सिटी ग्रुप में मूव हुए। इन्होंने सिटी बैंक में वेरियस फंक्शंस लीडरशिप रोल पे वर्क किया। ये सिटी बैंक के हेड ऑफ इंटरनल ऑडिट भी रहे। उसके बाद में इनका लास्ट प्रोफाइल सिटी बैंक में था। ही वाज डायरेक्टर एंड वो क्रिटिकल बैंकिंग ऑपरेशंस और स्ट्रेटेजिक इनिशिएटिव्स को ओवरसी करते थे। बाय प्रोफेशन सर सर्टिफाइड कॉस्ट अकाउंटेंट हैं और एनआईएमएस से इन्होंने एमएमएस किया हुआ है, मुंबई यूनिवर्सिटी से किया हुआ है। सर एक्टिवली सोशल एक्टिविटीज में काफी ज्यादा इन्वॉल्व हैं एंड ही इज वन ऑफ द मेजर वॉइस इन रूरल वुमेन डेवलपमेंट। सर का काफी अच्छा एक्सपीरियंस रहा है अक्रॉस दी बैंकिंग और स्पेशली सर का रोल रहा है बैंकिंग स्पेस में ज्यादातर रोल रहा है गवर्नेंस फंक्शंस पे, एश्योरेंसेस पे, जो आज के लिए आरबीआई के लिए का मोस्ट इम्पोर्टेंट फोकस एरियाज हैं यूसीबीस में। तो मैं अमर सर से रिक्वेस्ट करूंगा कि वो हमारे साथ अपने एक्सपीरियंस शेयर करें और वेबिनार को स्टार्ट करें। आप सबसे रिक्वेस्ट है कि आप सब लोग जैसे सूर्य मैम बोलती हैं अपने पेन, पेंसिल, पेपर सब रेडी रखिए। जो इम्पोर्टेंट पॉइंट्स नोट कर लीजिए। आप कोई भी प्रश्न है वो क्यूएनए सेक्शन में डाल सकते हैं। हम लोग कोशिश करेंगे कि इसको वेबिनार के दौरान ही आपको आंसर कर दें। अगर हम लोग नहीं कर पाते हैं तो इसका हम जवाब आपको अलग से भिजवा देंगे। ये वेबिनार रिकॉर्ड हो रहा है और इसकी रिकॉर्डिंग भी सबको उपलब्ध रहेगी। तो अमर सर, आई रिक्वेस्ट यू टू स्टार्ट द वेबिनार प्लीज।
Thank you, Rahul. Thank you for inviting me to this webinar. At the outset, I realize it's a Friday evening, 5 o'clock. So I'll try and keep my presentation very brief and to the point. अगर आप किसी को कोई सवाल होगा, जैसे राहुल जी ने बताया, आप पूछ सकते हैं। I will try to wrap it up in maybe 30-40 minutes and then you can ask your questions. If we can't get to them, as Rahul said, we will try and do them offline. Thank you, Surya. Can we move to the first slide? I would try to...
Yes.
Yeah, so the agenda is really about building a strong governance framework. What we understand by governance is the board of directors is responsible for ensuring and certifying the robustness of governance in every urban cooperative bank. Management plays a two-way function, coordinating with staff on the one hand and with the board of directors on the other. There is a committee of the board called the audit committee of the board, which is responsible for internal audit. It is also responsible for regulatory compliance certification, which the management provides. There is a risk and compliance committee in many banks, which reviews credit risk, market risk, and compliance risk. And there is a committee that oversees IT, which is information technology, which is more and more a core component of governance, because more and more functions in the bank are automated, are universally linked to various digital public infrastructure as we know it, which is used by banks in the course of day-to-day operations. And the objective of today's webinar is to give you some thoughts on moving beyond compliance to assurance and to excellence. So I will try to share some thoughts on based on my experience. As Rahul said, I've spent the past about 3 years in SVC Bank in the urban cooperative banking landscape. So it's given me a good sense of what are the challenges and how do we operate in the same space as private sector banks, as public sector banks, and foreign banks. So to me, it is amazing that the urban cooperative banking sector manages to not just survive, but thrive in this space. I will move to the first page, which is, why are we here today? As I said, there is universal access to technology and information, as well as data. All banks are practically able to access the same level of technology as well as information. It is an intensely competitive business. And there is more and more regulatory scrutiny every passing day, whether it is about money laundering, whether it is about cybersecurity, whether it is about NCLT. So we need to be on top of the game when it comes to our internal audit function in particular. How do we really address this shift in the paradigm? There are a couple of things which the SVC does, and I'm sure many other banks do as well, which is the audit function reports directly to the board of directors, to the chief auditor, that is the chief internal auditor, reports to the audit committee of the board. The audit committee in turn asks for what is called an annual plan, which is the annual audit plan. And our endeavor is to make audit work more and more risk-based. Over the previous about 5 or 7 years, we have seen a sea change in the way the audit function is held accountable. Earlier, auditors were expected to complete every branch and every function in a given calendar period. More and more, the audit committee looks at audits of processes rather than audits of branches. And that conviction is derived from the need to make audit work more risk-based, because we have branches which are not so active or so heavy. We have functions which are extremely risk-based, anti-money laundering, for instance, technology work, for instance. And therefore, it is essential to make audit cover these activities without fail and in a very thorough manner. The other aspect of the audit committee focus is more on assurance and away from the erstwhile regulatory compliance. What I mean is, compliance used to be a tick the box saying, have I audited this activity? Have I, completed these number of branches in the quarter? More and more, the audit committee is concerned with obtaining assurance that risks are being controlled. And to that extent, the emphasis is towards receiving assurance rather than simply certifying compliance. And that is what we are here to discuss today. How does one make this transition? Moving to the next slide, what I like is to focus on key imperatives. First is whether as an organization are we resilient, because risk is inherent in everything we do. And without taking risk, the organization cannot function. By resiliency, I mean both having the thorough understanding of all the risks that are inherent in our business, as well as being able to measure them, control them, monitor them. And if risks do crystallize, despite the best controls, of being able to bounce back as an organization. That is really the topmost concern of the audit committee of the board. The question we ask our chief auditor is to ensure that our staff are agile, that they are adaptable, that they are data native. What I mean by data native is that they are comfortable dealing with volumes of data. The earlier paradigm was one where auditors used to look at the total population of data and then take samples. That age has gone. We are now in an age where we need to audit the entire population of data. We need to look at exceptions across the entire population, focus on exceptions which are high risk, focus on exceptions which arise despite preventive controls, and focus on data which has not been detected by the underlying function or the underlying business. This requires a high level of training, adaptability, and confidence in handling large masses of data. And the third thing that the audit committee is intensely focused on is about processes. Processes have inherent risk, as I said, and there are controls that are designed to mitigate that inherent risk. At the end of a certain process, one is left with what is called residual risk despite the controls having been applied. Our processes need to be proactive in line with market practices, in line with regulatory practices, in line with customer behavior. Because at the end of the day, we are not just auditing a process, we are auditing how a customer behaves in light of that process. Let me give you an example. We have anti-money laundering controls. We ask for the customer's initial profile data, based on which we ask the customer to disclose what is their annual expected salary or their annual expected earnings. Let me put it generally as earnings, which are expected to come into the account. What is the expected pattern of withdrawals from the account? We need our processes to be proactive in the sense, if we find larger amounts of money coming into the account or leaving the account, our processes need to be able to detect such accounts and monitor their activity and report them if we find them to be significantly at variance with the initial pattern that the customer had indicated. These are key imperatives. We model our functions, we model our staff in line with, for instance, take another example. If it is systems, if we have a large number of servers of different pedigree, we need to administer the patches on them on a regular basis. And we need to have the capacity to detect which patches are out of date, and therefore how many staff are required, and what is the process thereafter to test the application and its workability before that patch can be applied in production and released to users. So we need all our processes to be proactive, not wait for a customer to, make a regular account a mule account, a regular server to be compromised, and so on. So we need our processes to be proactive, and that is one of the key concerns of the audit committee. I would like to move to the governance framework next. Framework deals with elements of what are called strong governance. So one of the things the audit committee does is look at the future of the business over the next 12 to 18 months and expect an audit plan that addresses all the key developments over that period, and not merely cover all the audit entities. By entities, I mean departments, branches, and functions. The universe of activity needs to be forward-looking. It needs to ensure that all the risks that are likely to emerge over the next 12 to 18 months will be addressed by the audit plan. And the audit plan will also be flexible, will be agile enough to adapt to developments that emerge over this period. At the same time, we need to have risk-based controls which react in the moment. For instance, we acquire a large number of deposits as we operate branches, right? As we open branches, or even in existing branches, there may be contests, there may be festivals, or whatever they are called. There may be a large number of customers creating relationships with the branch. We need our controls to be in the moment, which means if customers walk in and deposit money or run a zero balance account or a near zero balance account for a considerable period of time, but suddenly witness major inflows either through UPI or IMPS, we need to have in the moment controls to identify such accounts, identify such customer relationships, go back to understand what is the nature of that customer's activity, and then flag such accounts immediately. And that is what I mean by in the moment, because these are at risk of using the underlying reputation of the bank.
Amarnath sir, am I audible? So sorry to cut you. Am I audible? Amarnath sir, am I audible to you?
Activities which are nefarious in nature. Also need to focus on
तो आपकी वॉइस बीच में क्रैक कर रही है.
Am I audible, Rahul?
So now you're audible, sir. बीच में आप for 3-4 minutes you were not audible, sir. आपकी आवाज नहीं आ रही.
Oh, I'm sorry. Okay.
Yeah, so if you could repeat the last 4 to 5 lines again, because we missed you there.
Sure. I'm sorry about it.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, yeah, by risk-based controls, we mean, controls that are required to be performed more intensively in certain circumstances when events dictate the course of action. For instance, if a branch manager is to notice a depositor walking into the branch and ask to withdraw a sizable deposit prematurely, you need in the moment awareness to confront the customer and ask if he or she is the potential victim of cybercrime in any means, whether they are subject to digital arrest, investment scam. The other alternative could be where you see rapid deposits coming into a recently opened account, followed by a rapid withdrawal of money, and that profile does not fit what the customer described their business or their activity at the time of account opening. So these are what are called risk-based controls, and we need internal audit to be aware and audit against such controls, which legacy or traditional auditors have not been doing. The other thing we need is to focus on process, systems, and people in that order. Increasingly, processes are automated. There are very few institutions where you will find processes entirely manual. Most of them would have a large system-based culture within them. The thing about what are called mule accounts, which are heavily in the press these days, is that they exploit all three. They exploit potential staff integrity, they exploit system vulnerability, and they also exploit process weaknesses. So we need internal audit to focus on all three elements. The most important is for internal audit to devote its attention on controls that serve to prevent risk rather than just detect it. Because other functions, including in-business control, are often tasked with detecting exceptions. For instance, insurance, which has not been provided against assets that have been pledged to the bank, or mortgages which are lacking in paper. All these activities are detected and they are tracked by departments other than internal audit. Audit needs to therefore focus increasingly on preventive controls, which do not let these things slip. And one of the focus areas of the audit committee is to ensure that more and more solutions used in the bank are automated and are sustainable. Because when you have manual processes, they are often prone to failure. And that is the reason we look for solutions that are adaptable as circumstances change and therefore can be termed as sustainable, as well as automation. I'd like to move to the last slide, which is about tools. Risk and control self-assessment is, in fact, a key tool that is used in most large institutions and which increasingly need to be adapted in urban cooperative banks. This essentially is a tool for every operating unit to list out all the processes that are performed in that unit with the corresponding risks that are embedded in those processes, the inherent risk, and also quote the controls that the unit is supposed to perform against each of those risks. At the end of a period, such as a month, the unit is responsible for indicating how many of those controls have failed or have not been meaningfully performed to address that inherent risk. Let me give an example. In an IT function, for instance, you would have errors that happened and that were reported by departments. The risk and control self-assessment would take each of those errors back to the source to understand whether it is a result of a testing failure of software or whether it is the result of a function that does not exist in the software, which some user has tried to perform. In clearing, for instance, you would have checks that were not presented on time as being a fail, or checks where signature was, or checks that were returned because of technical reasons. So the risk and control self-assessment is a broad framework to help operating departments kind of self-declare, the state of control that they have been able to maintain for a certain period, for a month, for a quarter, and so on. And what the audit committee would do is encourage the business, encourage management to look at what the internal audit team has been able to detect as fails, which do not appear in the risk and control self-assessment of the underlying business that was audited. This would encourage the business to upgrade the quality of its RCSA, as well as to report more transparently. And the risk profile of RCSAs over time, the trend of risk over time, would be used to detect, the state of control within the organization as a whole, and to devote resources, whether additional manpower, whether additional systems, whether better systems, and so on. By risk indicators, KRIs, let me give a few thoughts. For instance, this covers the number of accounts where security is yet to be perfected, the number of servers in IT which are yet to be patched. In investments, for instance, the number of forms which have yet to be submitted by customers who have already been sold a certain investment product. It helps to have key risk indicators for all material risk factors in each function, and to monitor against thresholds and keep tightening the thresholds over time. One of the things I've noticed in disaster recovery is that institutions are often focused only on IT recovery and not on large functions, not on premises, not on facilities, and so on. And very often it is a facility that may fail. For instance, air conditioning failure or transport failure may cause certain critical infrastructure to be compromised. So by disaster recovery, I'm referring to business continuity planning, not just for IT, not just for telecom, but for all other functions as well that are considered meaningful. For instance, when an ATM goes down, in today's environment, you can encourage the customer to go to an alternate ATM of another bank. But the customer will face inconvenience as well as additional cost if they exceed the free services that are permitted across the ATM network. So our disaster recovery the plan needs to have provision for handling these circumstances. And finally, third-party supplier risk. It is important to have not just an inventory of third-party suppliers, understand the nature of risk they pose to the bank, as well as have meaningful backups for all of them. So these are some of the tools that we actively use in banks and we try and make them more and more robust as time goes by. So that really brings me to what I thought was the end of this presentation. If any of you have questions, I'd be happy to take them.
Any questions, anyone? Please feel free to write in the Q&A section. आपको कोई सवाल पूछनी है सर से, कोई क्वेरीज है, आप Q&A सेक्शन में लिख सकते हो.
You know, one of the challenges with the digital public infrastructure in India is that not all of it is quickly responsive to UCBs. For instance, the central KYC registry, right? That's a great infrastructure, but then very often we find it is not responsive. The other is this, the mulehunter.ai, you know, the public registry of criminals or fraudsters that has been initiated by the Ministry of Home Affairs. The Reserve Bank requires that we need to integrate this platform with our anti-money laundering reviewing mechanism, and that is receiving top attention these days. So these are sort of the hot buttons that are on the regulators' kind of top of mind.
Okay, I feel there are no questions. It was clear. Yeah, there is one question from Mr. Sandeep. So when bank detects suspicious transactions in customer account and when they are forwarded to FIU, whether said accounts needs to freeze.
You know, this is a conundrum in the sense we are still in a regulatory gray area, because there is a case pending before the Supreme Court, and the Reserve Bank has submitted its views in the matter. The account cannot be frozen because the case was in fact filed by a set of people who were aggrieved that their funds had been frozen. There is a via media that the Reserve Bank is looking at, which is to establish not the entire account being frozen, but potentially identifying the amount of money that has been fraudulently brought into the account and being able to lien mark or mark a hold on those funds, whereas the rest of the funds ought to be available to the depositor for operation. But this process, as I started saying, is still under legal scrutiny. It has not been formally, officially communicated to banks. So one needs to look at the facts of each case, understand whether that account has been notified by a legal enforcement authority, and whether there is any way to preserve the relationship with the customer, but at the same time observe the law. So it's a regulatory gray area at this time.
Okay. All right. So there are no further questions, sir. I hope we can conclude it. Rahulji, would you like to add any inputs before we conclude the session?
Any other questions from you, Rahul, or any of your colleagues in UCFDC?
Yeah, there is one
I
question.
have just requested if you can just briefly tell the banks about risk-based return audit.
Yeah.
ये एक क्वेरी है जो हमें बहुत रेगुलर मिलती है. तो बेसिकली ब्रॉडली अगर आप बता दें कि क्या हम इसे टच करते हैं, कैसे करते हैं, एक बार वो समझा सके तो it would be good for all the participants.
See, the legacy or the classical approach to internal audit used to be to take in a calendar year from April to March And the regulatory view or expectation at one time used to be that you need to cover the entire universe of activities in the bank in that period. And that is what the internal auditor team was staffed to perform. The focus was not on low risk, medium risk, high risk. It was not on criticality of functions. It was not based on volume. It was not based on completeness of the audit universe, such as recently launched activities. Because if you started with a certain function, let's take an example. If you started with the year with a review of, say, credit department, whereas towards the end of the year, the credit department underwent a major transformation. The focus was not on looking at the nature of that transformation. It was more on ticking the box saying, this entity has been audited, say in April or May or June of this year. So we will look at it next year. The change to risk-based internal audit is truly to look at all moving parts in the organization as the year progresses, to look at activities, initiatives that have been launched. For instance, if I have done a change of my data center location, to look at that project wherein that migration took place. If I set up, say, 5 new branches over the last 12 months, defining the scale at which the branches need to operate before they are audited, or to look at certain activities in all of those branches rather than all of those activities that the branches perform. So risk-based auditing really looks at the inherent risk in every activity. For instance, you create a new department to process, say, SME loans of a certain value, to have a specific tailored review of that department and its activities when it has reached critical stages. For instance, it has started processing, say, 50% or 75% of its capacity for the bank, of getting in there, performing a risk-based internal audit and reporting back to the audit committee of the board. So this is what is called risk-based internal audit. Increasingly, low volume branches or low volume activities, low risk activities are held until much later in the year. But all of the activities are necessarily reviewed, some with greater frequency, some with greater rigor than others. So that is what risk-based internal audit really means. It differs from bank to bank because the nature of credit, the nature of deposits, the nature of other activities vary from bank to bank. And if third parties are used more often in some banks, those activities need to be covered as well. So I've tried to kind of give some textured answer. Does that help?
Rahul ji, you're on mute.
प्रॉब्ली इस पे अपने को एक डिटेल्ड सेशन रखना पड़ेगा बिकॉज रिस्क बेस्ड इंटरनल ऑडिट पे काफी क्वेरीज आती हैं और स्पेसिफिकली ये भी पूछा जाता है कि हाउ टू डू इट और क्या क्या चीज देखनी चाहिए फॉर डिपार्टमेंट कर रहे हैं ब्रांच का कर रहे हैं तो कैसे करना चाहिए कैसे आइडेंटिफाई करें किन पैरामीटर्स यूज करें कि विच डिपार्टमेंट हाई रिस्क डिपार्टमेंट उनको ऑडिट फ्रीक्वेंसी ज्यादा होनी चाहिए कौन से लो रिस्क डिपार्टमेंट जहाँ ऑडिट फ्रीक्वेंसी कैन बी रिड्यूस्ड तो वो सब क्वेश्चंस काफी आते हैं तो एक बार अपने को प्रॉब्ली इसको we'll take it as a separate topic sir एक बार
We need to take examples. If we can have 2 or 3 examples of institutions that are trying to address this question, using those examples, we can have a more kind of in-depth understanding. The concept is rather sort of amorphous. It's not very crystal clear. So it is judgmental. Risk-based audit does not mean, as I said, covering 1 to 100, all the units, all the businesses, all the departments in a certain period. It means doing potentially some activities twice in a year or thrice in a year. It means giving precedence to certain businesses and certain activities over other activities. if I perceive clearing to be a low risk function, I might not necessarily review it. If I see fund transfers to be low risk, I need to understand why. How do I bring down the risk in fund transfers? Those controls are as essential in determining the risk-based audit plan as frequency. The rigor with which controls are performed is as important as frequency.
एक क्वेश्चन अभी आया है डीपीडीपी एक्ट के ऊपर कुछ, अगर आप ब्रीफली टच अपॉन कर सकें इसको तो.
The Personal Data Protection Act has many layers, and I think you will require a separate session to kind of to touch on all the key points that the Act requires. It requires the primary sort of pillars are consent. Consent to obtain data from customers, from all relationships, not just customers. Any relationship that the bank enters into as a legal entity in the course of its business needs to be made aware that their data is being obtained and they are willingly providing it. That data needs to be handled in certain ways such that it will not fall into the wrong hands and be misused. The bank needs to ensure data is encrypted in many cases. There are cases where banking at large, rather, is required to preserve all its data within the country. And there have been instances where data has been found to be going to other countries because of the nature of systems that some banks may be using. For example, all banks that are automated would have what are called firewalls. And there is software which reviews the firewall audit trails on a day-to-day basis. It is found that some service providers are actually taking those audit trails and sending it to servers in other countries. Even that is not permitted. That is considered to be a serious regulatory violation. Although first maybe time the regulator may say, okay, you are not aware about it. But increasingly data privacy protection needs to be worked into contracts with such service providers as well. The ones who handle audit trails of servers and other infrastructure within the IT operating environment. So it has many aspects to it.
ठीक है सर, thank you sir.
Most important is you require, on a need to know basis. Information should be sought on a need to know basis, and not because you are in a privileged position handling a customer's finances.
Yeah, correct. So there are no more questions in the chat box now. Rahulji, with your due permission, may we conclude this session?
Please, Amar sir, lots of thanks from our side. You took some time and spent some time on it with us. And as we said, we would like to have your expertise on the risk-based internal audit. So probably we'll get in touch with you separately for that topic, and then we'll go in depth with that topic. We would in touch with you and we'll try to do it. And similarly, certain things on compliance side also and the risk side also, we'll take a special topics on it. So maybe either we do it together or we do it separately. So that will decide.
All right.
Thank you, sir. Thanks a lot for your inputs and your guidance.
Thank you.
Thanks,
Thank you, Surya, for all the trouble you took in logistics.
Not at all, not at all. So we truly extend our heartfelt gratitude from NUCFDC as well as a whole of our UCB ecosystem who could attend us. And of course, we have captured the session recording. We will be sharing it with all the UCB colleagues for their future reference. Your guidance and practical perspective have truly enriched our understanding, sir. Thank you so much for that. Also, a sincere thank you for all the participants for your presence, for your engagement, also for the questions, queries you asked. Please do not hesitate to write to me at pathshala@nucfdc.in or surya.vishwakarma@nucfdc.in for any queries you have further to clarify. So your commitment to continuous learning, my dear friends, makes these sessions more impactful as well as meaningful. So on behalf of NUCFDC, Sahakar Pathshala, we look forward to welcoming you to many more such impactful, enriching learning sessions. Wishing everybody a very happy learning and a very, very pleasant evening ahead. Thank you so much, everyone. Thank you, Rahulji. Thank you so much, Amarnath. Namaste.
Thank you, sir. Thank you, sir.